So in my last video, I mentioned that the goal of this excursion, this van life journey that we're on, is to expose my girlfriend and myself to parts of the United States that we're not really familiar with. And that involves the good, the bad, and the ugly. In that video, we primarily focused on the bad and the ugly. But in this video, I want to expose my girlfriend to the good that the United States has to offer. Because let's be real, at the end of the day, the US is a developed nation. It's technically the wealthiest country on the planet. If not the wealthiest, then definitely one of the wealthiest. And all in all, it's a first world country that is very, very well developed. While it's still behind Europe in many ways, it's ahead of most other countries on this planet in pretty much every conceivable way. And bearing that in mind, I want to talk about the contrast between the good, the bad, and the ugly, because being here in New Orleans, I think that my girlfriend, and you correct me if I'm wrong at any point throughout this video, but I would imagine that you have never in your life encountered this degree of contrast between the good, the bad, and the ugly. So what stands out to you walking around this area? This is Audubon Park, right off St. Charles Street or St. Charles Avenue. I don't really know which one it is, but basically one of the wealthiest parts of New Orleans. What stands out to you being in this area compared to where we were earlier in Gerttown, in Kenner, etc.?
Yeah, I feel like the kind of trees that they have here, and more trees.
More trees?
Are like a signature sign that you're in a more well-developed area.
Yeah.
And then the houses are much taller and bigger.
Yeah, a lot more two-story, maybe even three-story houses. As a matter of fact, let's go closer to the houses so that I can show you some of the architecture, because it's a lot different than anything you would see in Dallas. Definitely a lot different than anything you'll see in the Netherlands or Spain or anywhere else in Europe. But I will say that when it comes to economic inequality, New Orleans has to be right there at the top of the list. I mean, I don't have any statistics to back this up, but just visually, anecdotally speaking, when you see a house like this right here, I mean, let's walk up closer. This is a really, really nice house, just objectively speaking. I guess there's no such thing as objectivity when you're talking about architecture, but I mean, this house right here, this is in the same city, within the city limits, as what we saw in Gerttown earlier. Maybe a, what, 10-15 minute drive at most?
That's such a big difference.
Major difference. You have another one right here.
See, even though they have a really nice, that's a really nice front porch area, there's no one sitting outside.
Yeah.
Which is a huge difference as well.
Yeah, to be fair, they could potentially be somewhere in the park. But I also feel like maybe the people who live in these types of houses, they don't really have much work-life balance, I would imagine. But I could be wrong about that, because I don't think that the people who live in this area are new money. These are all old money people who probably don't even have to work. So I wonder where they are. Why are they not outside?
There's actually squirrels and stuff here.
Yeah.
And I don't or have not seen that in Gerttown or...
Yeah. Like, even the wildlife doesn't want to be there. But even just the atmosphere in this place is a lot different than Gerttown or Kenner. I mean, just the fact that we're outside walking and talking with this camera, that already tells you everything you need to know about the difference.
That's so crazy to me that there's, in such a short distance, it's so different.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're two completely different places.
And in many ways they are.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad said that growing up, you would think that this would create a lot of issues where people from those types of communities would be coming to these types of communities,
Yeah.
and maybe breaking into houses or whatever, but you don't see any real security measures other than a door with a lock, which every reasonable person has. The reason why that's the case is because the people in those neighborhoods know not to mess with these people. Because, I mean, for one, again, I've said this in multiple videos now, but Louisiana has the highest incarceration rate of literally any place, at least in the developed world. So the US has the highest incarceration rate in the free world or developed world, whatever you want to call it, and Louisiana has the highest incarceration rate in the US. But also, a lot of these people, again, they're coming from old money, they're probably well connected. And when you have the person whose house you just burglarized going and getting drinks or playing golf with the judge assigned to your case, my friend, you're cooked. You are absolutely cooked. This right here is pretty nice. They have these swings on the trees.
Yeah.
But
This is a nice house.
this is a really, really nice house. I've never seen a house like this before.
Yeah.
Look at how big those doors are.
And all that light coming in.
Yeah. And this one right here, this is definitely that traditional New Orleans style.
And that's the sign when they have any kind of kids things in there. The whole West jumping.
Yeah,
What are they called?
the bouncy house.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely insane. I mean, going through the Netherlands, going through Valencia, I didn't really travel through Valencia that extensively, but really anywhere that I went to in Europe, I never saw this degree of economic inequality. And honestly, this is the story of many major American cities, even Dallas, where I spent the majority of my life. I mean, you have places like Highland Park, which resemble this area right here. I've taken my girlfriend there before, and I would even say Highland Park is probably wealthier than this area.
Yeah, it looks wealthier.
Yeah, but then you have areas like, let's say, Pleasant Grove or Oak Cliff, which you're never gonna see. I won't even go there on Google Maps, let alone in real life. That's in South Dallas. But those are areas that you just don't go to unless you have a very clear and definitive reason for being there.
But how did they...
And let's actually walk down this way so we can see more of the neighborhood.
How did it come about then that there's such a huge difference? Where did that start?
It's hard to say when it started, but what I will say, you posed a question earlier, actually after we finished filming, that I want to touch on really quickly. You were basically asking why those low-income neighborhoods are the way that they are. And look, I don't have all the answers about this stuff. I'm just a 25-year-old figuring this life thing out like anyone else. But what I do know is, again, this state has the highest incarceration rate in the free world. And what this means is that obviously men are incarcerated at a much higher rate than women are. And this means that a lot of young men, even my father included, grow up without a consistent male role model in their lives. And look, we could talk about gender roles or whatever in another video. That's a different discussion for a different day. But what I do know is that, generally speaking, men and women bring different skill sets to the table. And I'm saying this to say that a lot of times these young men who don't have these father figures in their lives, they never really learn how to manage their emotions in the way that I learned to from having a consistent father figure and a consistent mother figure in my life. And because of that, you end up having whole communities who are crash outs, where someone like my dad might go to the Air Force, come back 4 or 5 years later with a degree, just to find out that most of the people he grew up around were either dead or in jail or not doing anything with their lives. That's the norm. My dad is the exception rather than the rule. And in many ways, you could argue that my dad's story is pretty much the perfect embodiment of what the American dream is. When you think about the progression of going from where he grew up to where I grew up in that first house in Kenner, it was an upgrade. It wasn't the perfect place, but it was an upgrade. And then going from that to the next place in Slidell, and obviously they're living pretty well now.
Yeah.
But to my point in the video where we drove through some of these areas, he shouldn't have had to do that. He should not have had to claw his way out of poverty. He shouldn't have had to join the military. He shouldn't have had to take such extreme measures just to make a way for himself when you have people living like this. Now, is there some level of personal responsibility factored into this economic inequality? Absolutely. It's fair to say that on average, most of these people, and if not them, their ancestors, the people who put them in this position, were more responsible people than the people that my dad grew up around. But again, when you're actively targeting the lower income communities, creating this negative feedback loop. This is a really nice yard right here, the fountain and everything. But when you're creating this negative feedback loop where, because people don't have those male role models, they grow up to become crash outs, they have children early, they go to prison, and then their children grow up to be just like them, if not worse. How do you break out of that cycle? And again, I don't have the answer to that question, but I at least see the disparity to the extent that I feel compelled to ask the question. And I think that's the big difference. Why is it like this? Why does it have to be like this? Does it have to be like this? In the past, I would have said yeah, because that's all I knew. But again, my girlfriend, she's 23 years old, born and raised in the Netherlands, very well traveled. You've been to what, Italy? You want to list out the countries you've been to?
Yeah, Belgium, Germany. What have you been to? Germany, Belgium, France, Spain, Italy, Turkey, the US.
Okay, so again, she's very well traveled, and to our point earlier, up until today, have you or have you not experienced this degree of economic inequality?
No.
Exactly. So for her to go through, that was a lizard down there.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a lizard.
Where?
It's in the bushes.
Oh.
Yeah, we get distracted really easily, but anyways, for her to get through the first 23 years of her life, you're 23, right?
Yeah.
for her to get through the first 23 years of her life without having seen this degree of economic inequality is very telling. What it tells me, at least, I don't know if everyone else is going to draw the same conclusion, what it tells me is that this isn't necessary. This is not necessary. And look, we've been to some well-to-do neighborhoods in the Netherlands as well, and are they living as well as the people here? Maybe, maybe not, but it's not that big of a difference. The difference between the people who are at the top of the food chain here and the top of the food chain in the Netherlands is much, much smaller than the difference between the people at the bottom of the food chain in the US and the bottom of the food chain in the Netherlands. And I think that's the big difference. It's not so much about the well-to-do people, it's about the people who have the leftovers, the underdogs, if you will. And to say that the US is the wealthiest country on the planet and yet has places like Gerttown, I mean, I don't know. I don't really know what to make of that. I just know that, in my opinion, it just doesn't make sense. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't make sense to be the wealthiest country and then have such poor places within it.
Yeah.
There should be some kind of balance in it. are in there or something.
Exactly. 100%. And look, just to sort of drive this point home, I want to share this conspiracy theory with you amongst people in New Orleans. Now, this is very controversial even to this day, but in previous videos I mentioned Hurricane Katrina and how Lake Pontchartrain flooded New Orleans and Slidell, for that matter. Well, allegedly, let's go ahead and cut across here, but allegedly, because I don't want to have people hear me saying this and they use their political influence to get me deported or something, but allegedly the levees in New Orleans were holding up initially during Hurricane Katrina. But people in the lower 9th Ward of New Orleans, which is pretty much, if I'm not mistaken, the most impoverished part of the city. So think Girt Town, but worse, okay? People who were there when it happened reported hearing an explosion shortly before the levee gave. And the levee gave in that area. And a lot of people believe that people from areas like this bombed the levees in order to preserve their homes, their manors, their mansions, their estates. Now, I wasn't there, so I don't know. I will say it is a bit convenient that it just so happened to breach in the poorest part of the city. But one thing I do know is that even before Hurricane Katrina, all of these problems were still very, very present. Are those chickens over there?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, we have to go investigate that.
Our hand.
We have to investigate that, but none of this is new. None of this is new. New Orleans was dealing with a lot of issues well before Katrina, and then you add Katrina onto that, and honestly, it hasn't really recovered since. And with the economic inequality that we see in a place like this, and this is just a small sample size, but with what we've seen throughout the past couple of videos, I don't know if I see a version of reality where things do improve.